Welcome back, everybody, to the Holiness Podcast, where we believe discipleship is the process and holiness is the result. My name is Leanne Alexander, and I am so glad that you have taken this journey with me this season. When we started out with a podcast, we were so grateful that Pentecostal Resources Group had the vision for this. But I'll be honest with you, I didn't know what to expect. I'm new to the podcast environment, so thank you for being flexible and patient as we've explored this and tried to think about new ways that we could talk about some precious doctrines and teachings and thoughts in our way of life. How do we talk about that? Well, we thought a podcast would be a great way to get back into this conversation. I appreciate the Pentecostal Resources Group and their vision for this. And go check out pentecostalpublishing.com. I'm going to share in just a few minutes some resources that I do think are helpful when it comes to these topics of discipleship and holiness. So today I want to start with a story, as I am prone to do. Let's have a little story time today. So I want to take you back 17 years ago. I moved from Louisiana to St. Louis. And wow, that was quite the journey. It's a culture shock. It really is. And anybody that's lived in one part of the country and moved to a very different part of the country, you know what I mean when I say that. And so it was for me. And so in the middle of all those firsts, you got to find a new place to get your car worked on. You got to find new restaurants that you can eat. And I'm coming from Louisiana, so I mean, you got to know that was torture. So I'm trying to work through all these firsts, and somewhere in that first year, I realized, I got to find a new dentist. Right now, a lot of people, there's some name for it. I can't even remember of when you're afraid of the dentist, or maybe that's too strong a word, but it's just uncomfortable and all that. Well, I have had dental work off and on for years for all kinds of crazy things, and it's a thing. So I'm used to this. Not a big deal. I've done the braces deal, done it all. I have spent a lot of time in a dentist chair. It doesn't faze me. I don't blink. I don't think twice. It pops up the phone. I go. It's not a big deal. But I've got to find a new dentist. And so I asked a friend, and so this friend's already telling me, where to go get groceries and everything else, or as we'd say from Louisiana, where to make groceries. That's a whole thing we'll talk about another time. And so, where do you go to the dentist? So she tells me her dentist. So I make an appointment and I go, and I don't know how to describe what's next. The carnage of that visit was just unreal. I don't want to gross you out if somebody's listening to the podcast or watching while you're having your lunch break, but the lady who was the hygienist who came in first to clean my teeth before the dentist comes for the exam and all of that kind of thing, she walks in, and I'm sure there was some kind of greeting. It was not that she was an unkind person. It was in no way that she was trying to inflict pain on me, but she did. There's no other way to say it. I mean, she just goes to town. I don't know what she used. I don't know if she'd had a bad day. I don't know if she'd been trained in some kind of way where it's like, I think she took the surface off my teeth. I don't want to be grotesque, but look, it's a mess. And I'm like laid back in the chair, and I'm hurting. And it's just like, I don't know, I've never had this happen at my previous dentist. This was not part of the experience. I don't know if I need to raise a hand and say, mercy. What do the kids say, when it's like, okay, I give up, white flag of surrender. Look, this is too much. I have tears just running down my face. There's everything else too. It's unreal. And she gets done and we're done. And in her mind, this is what you do. Now, the reality is I'm throwing this hygienist under the bus. What that really meant was that I hadn't been doing a good enough job myself in my home care. So I come to the dentist's office, and the hygienist has to deal with all kinds of junk that I hadn't taken care of. All right, what in the world does that have to do with this podcast and the season we've been talking about? All right, any metaphor, any analogy, if we take it too far, it breaks down, it gets dangerous. And so I always want to put disclaimers when I tell these stories. But let me tell you about the dentist story. You probably have some story of you've gone to the dentist. And here's the deal. What usually happens to me, and what definitely happened to me that visit, is I come home from the dentist and I say, that's it. Next time I go back, it's going to be amazing because I'm going to floss every day, maybe twice a day for the next 6 months until the next visit. And that lasts about 3 days, right? And then I go back to chaos. And then my phone dings, and in 3 days, I've got the next dentist appointment. Where'd that 6 months go, by the way? But I got to go back to the dentist. So for 3 days, I flossed the fire out of my teeth and the gums are swollen, the whole deal. That's not enough time. And so I get back to the dentist and we're back to the same routine, right? Does that sound familiar? That's what it's like for me. You all out there are probably more organized. You're a good podcast listener, viewer. Your life is probably together and you're saying, oh my goodness, that's a miserable way to live. Why do you do that? I don't know. It's the way life works for me. I'm going to make a little parallel here. I want to be super careful. The dentist in this story does not symbolize God or the church or anything. It's none of that. Ignore the hygienist. She's a non-factor. Let's just talk about me. When I do nothing with my teeth, when I do nothing with my health, I've shared other stories. You're seeing a pattern here. I need to take better care of myself. It needs to be more routine. The point I'm trying to just make a little simple parallel here. If I don't take care of a certain part of my life, be it my health with my teeth, be it my exercise routine, whatever that is, when I wait and then all of a sudden go, oh goodness, this is out of control, and I try like to do like a 2-day wonder floss job, it just doesn't work, does it? I want to back up from there. Again, I'm not going very far with that analogy, not trying to compare one-to-one here, but let's just talk about the principle that usually in life, if we don't maintain things, when we finally do work on whatever the case, it's a big deal. It's kind of overwhelming. All right, that's just a life principle. Don't clean your house for 6 months. When you finally decide, oh, I probably should like clean up this kitchen, it's overwhelming. All right, whatever the metaphor, I want to make the comparison again to our spiritual lives. If I don't have some kind of ongoing plan to draw close to God, to be like God, to pursue Him, to live in His image, then it gets really, I don't know, it's just not the healthiest way to live, is it? Well, that's what we've been talking about this season. I want to just walk through some of the things that we've talked about and really just kind of try to wrap everything up with a bow today. This amazing first season, all the wonderful guests that have joined us. I hope you've heard what I really want to focus on today, and that is this comprehensive, this holistic look at discipleship and holiness. It's got to be part of our ongoing lifestyle, right? We're not just going to decide one day, ooh, today I'll be holy, forget about it for 6 months, and then go, oh, wow, okay, it's time to do that holiness thing. It's not like that. I kind of joke because there are people who play golf and then there are golfers. So there was a time in my life where I was a golfer. I got really into it about 5 or 6 years ago, got obsessed with it. I was playing 2-3 times a week. Every night as part of my evening routine, I lay a towel out on this end of the house. I've got the sand wedge and I'm practicing chipping and all this. There was a time, I was a golfer. It mattered to me. I cared about it. It was priority that I worked into my daily routine. Now I'm doing good if I just play golf. I think last year I went out like 2 whole times for the year. It's something that's fun and I enjoy it, but it's seasons have changed. I'm not a golfer. I just play golf occasionally. You understand the same idea there. If something's important to us, it becomes part of our identity and then it becomes part of our daily process. And so I want to frame this conversation, this final conversation on holiness before we switch gears for next season. I want to put it in perspective of, is this part of your ongoing lifestyle? And what are you doing to daily grow in these areas? And so let's recap a little bit where we've been this season. So I really greatly appreciate the time that Brother David Bernard invested to be part of the podcast. If you didn't catch that season, you're going to want to go back and check it out. So he's talking to us as someone who's authored books on holiness and who is passionate about it. You probably remember hearing that passion come out as he's talking. He's talking to us about holiness as an apostolic practice and as part of this journey that the Pentecostal movement has been on to understand pursuing God. And I just am so grateful for his time. And in a similar vein, we had Brother Robert Johnston, our editor-in-chief, who talked to us about some historical roots and then some theological roots. So I just love that idea when he talked to us about getting the order right. When I understand the value of being in relationship with God, then holiness is going to flow out of that. We don't live a way we do to get God to love us. We can't. That's not scriptural. But because he loves us, then we react in certain ways and we do certain things. And so I hope that was a helpful reframing as well when we had that conversation. I appreciated Brother Everett Gossard being part. If you remember, Brother Gossard really talked to us about the word worship. He's done a lot of study in that area. And I'll just tell you, for me, I'm going to add a little commentary here, right? Do you love it when people like repreach, something at the end of a service? Maybe they repreach the message. Forgive me if I'm doing just a little bit here, but as I've now seen all of these different episodes come together, I appreciated Brother Gossard's when we started talking about worship. I've sometimes said that I do certain things as worship to God, as an offering to God. And that's absolutely true, but it's still part of that discipleship process, isn't it? And so I really wanted to emphasize that part of our conversation. And Brother DJ Hill, I love the work he's doing to think about we're made in the image of God, and holiness is being conformed again to the image of God and bearing that image out for others. So it's about our identity. It's about understanding our identity, living that identity out. Add to that Sister Tracy Jacobs' passion that we find our purpose. And part of our discipleship journey and then the holiness that we live out is because we're people of purpose. We're walking worthy of that vocation that God has called us to. And so, yes, I'm going to make certain decisions about the way I live because I'm not living my life day to day like, I wonder what I'm going to do today. I wonder what's going to happen today. I wonder today if I should do this or not. I wonder what I should do with this ethical choice today. And it's all just this random, whatever I feel like that. No, that's not the picture, because I'm living out my identity as being made in the image of God and my purpose as being called of God. And we talk so beautifully about that calling is not limited to one certain box that equals calling, but that is this bigger picture of being in relationship with God and knowing he has a purpose for every single one of us. So I have loved these conversations. I hope they've been a blessing to you. Again, if any of that you heard, you're like, oh, I don't remember that one. Go back and check it out. Make sure you got all those episodes because it's been a really, really exciting journey. I've loved it. Again, I didn't know what to expect when we started this journey with this first season of the podcast, but I think it's been a great journey, and I hope you felt the same way. So then let's talk looking ahead. What does this mean as we go forward? Well, I hope in your personal life, again, there's this commitment to discipleship, and as part of that, recognizing that that's going to affect the way we live, which I would say is holiness. And I want to challenge you today to evaluate, is this a lifelong process for me? Don't be me with the every 6 months realize, oh goodness, I need to start flossing again. Is this something that you've incorporated into your life? Let me push a little further while I'm prodding a little bit, while I'm asking maybe some questions. I hope in a positive way. I hope I love you. I hope it's encouraging. But while we're maybe kind of stretching ourselves a little bit, let me ask something else. Are we celebrating holiness and not weaponizing holiness? Now, that's a little phrase I've been playing with this last week or two. Here's what I mean. I live the way I do, like we talked about with Brother Johnston, because he loves me. In response to belonging to Jesus, being his child, being made in his image, being called of him, ... all of these things about what he's done in my life and who he is to me. Then ... there's certain things I do as a result. Again, it's about the order. I notice that every once in a while, if I'm not careful, I won't put that on anybody else. If I'm not careful, I can get some of my life choices out of perspective. And I might be tempted to go to God and say, hey, look what I'm doing for you. And then maybe when I get in a place of desperation in my life and I need something, I go, hey, God, now I've done X, Y, and Z. So you do X, Y, and Z. I get that there are times in prayer when our desperation, we are real with God. And I get there, maybe you were thinking of it, well, wait a second, at this place in the scripture, it looked like this Bible character kind of reminded God of their faithfulness. I get there's some of that. I get that's okay, but let's be careful. I do what I do to God as my reasonable service. I'm not doing something that's just so outrageous and look at me, God, I've been good to you because I've done X, Y, and Z. I'm doing a reasonable service. I'm living in response to who he's made me to be and all the things he's done and the callings he's placed on my life. This is my response to him. It's not a bargaining chip to get what I want. I don't live a certain way so that, okay, if I put in X number of prayer hours and if I do ABC spiritual disciplines and I do these marks of holiness, now I'm entitled to one free miracle every X months. It's not the way it works. It's not the way it works. And I know you probably are more responsible than that. Maybe that's not something you've ever done or been tempted to do, but I know myself. I know my human tendencies. And because sometimes we may do that in our human relationships, then when we go to God, is it possible we might be guilty of taking that same approach to Him? We can't earn God's love. We don't even earn His favor, folks. I don't think so. Feel free to comment if you've got a different perspective. But I believe because He loves me and because I'm His child and because He's called me, He invites me to live a life that mirrors Him. That's a privilege. That's not something that, okay, I guess I'll do that, but then you owe me ... That's not how that works. So again, today, we've had so many conversations all season that I hope have maybe encouraged us to reframe some of these issues of discipleship and holiness. And I just today wanted to push this a little bit about this is an ongoing lifestyle that's lived in response to the invitation of my Savior to be like Him and be close to Him. What I do in areas of holiness and discipleship, it's not a bargaining chip. I'm not weaponizing it to go back to God and then say, because I did this, ... No, I'm living out my life, ongoing lifestyle commitment, because I genuinely believe this is a blessed way to live. Because if it's really about mirroring Him, well, how much better can you get than to live a way that reflects Him and is aligned with Him and what He says in His Word that He loves. So I wanted to suggest that perspective today. I wanted to maybe push you just a little bit. How do you value discipleship and holiness? How do you look at that? And what areas might we need to tweak our mindset just a little bit to look back at what we've talked about all season long and then kind of put this final perspective here today on the topic. Now, I don't want to just drop you off a cliff right there. Let me give you some resources. There's no way in 8 podcast episodes we can talk about everything we need to talk about holiness. There's no way. We're scratching the surface. I told Brother DJ Hill after our episode, I wanted to just kind of step back and give a big picture. We're probably going to dive into some specifics in future seasons, but this first season was about just helping us look at the big picture. I hope you've been encouraged by these conversations. And I don't want to just drop it off and say, okay, we're done with holiness. The whole point of even this episode is that this is this ongoing lifestyle. We're going to talk about it again. And the big thing I want to do this remainder of our time together is give you some resources. If something we've said has intrigued you, maybe challenged you, hopefully encouraged you, what can you do if you want to keep moving in this area? What can you do? Well, let's talk resources. The very first thing I want to do, Brother Bernard, when he was with us, referenced his books on holiness. I'm doing show and tell today. You probably can't see, and that's okay. It just helps me to remember what to talk about in the right order. But I want to start with Brother Bernard's 2 books on holiness. As he shared with us, he wrote In Search of Holiness when he was still a young man. He and his mother worked on that together, and I appreciated him sharing that beautiful story. This talks about principles of holiness. A lot of what we've been talking about this season, it's going to come back to things that he worked through in this book that helps us have this big picture understanding. So I want to encourage you, if you don't already have a copy of this or have read that, all this stuff I'm going to show you today, it's available at pentecostalpublishing.com. We're not doing an infomercial, but if you're passionate about these areas of holiness and discipleship, you may want to study further, and these are all great resources to have. He followed In Search of Holiness with Practical Holiness. And in this book, he's going to walk through some specifics. We've got the principles first. Now we're going to dig into some specifics and talk about how do I practically apply this to my life. So this book covers all kinds of stuff. It was probably our first comprehensive look to walk through all kinds of areas of life where if we want to pursue holiness, here's some things to think about. So I love these 2 books. Now, as he mentioned, I led the team that took those 2 books, put them together in a book called Pursuing Holiness. And we did that to create a small group curriculum on holiness. And so it's been several years back when we did this, but I still think this is just a phenomenal series. If you want to dig into what we've been talking about in more detail, I want to push you toward this. It'd be great to follow up the podcast with your own personal series or with friends, family. Pursuing Holiness by David Bernard. It's going to take the greatest hits of Practical Holiness and In Search of Holiness, put it together. It's got the videos you can watch where Brother Bernard introduces concepts, and then some questions that you can discuss together, reflect on. So some great stuff there. Now, I do want to share with you, probably by the time you're watching this, I hope it's live and available. I did a book for parents, guardians, workers in the church, those who work with children. I've got a new project coming out called Because I Belong to Jesus, a guide to conversations with kids about holiness. A lot of the stuff we've been talking about in the podcast, honestly, as I was working through the book, it kind of became the genesis for this first season. I've asked constantly as I go to churches, districts, and work with their teachers, if it's teachers of children, I will frequently get the question, what do we do to teach kids about holiness? And we give some principles in the curriculum at Pentecostal Publishing House, Pentecostal Resources Group, but it's very difficult. We serve so many different types of churches. It's very difficult to get very detailed in holiness in curriculum for a lot of reasons. So I was tired of saying, well, you can do a little bit of this, you can do a little bit of this. So I put together this resource that I hope is going to be helpful. It's talking points. It's not exhaustive, but you can look on pentecostalpublishing.com for Because I Belong to Jesus, and it's going to walk through, maybe even as it walks through for children, it may be helpful for all of us to dig into some of the areas in our lives that we want to reframe because we are His. So take a look at that. And then this feels awkward, honestly, putting out here some stuff that I've written, but I've heard people testify that that's been helpful. So not because I wrote it, but because people have said, hey, this helped me at a certain season of my life. Let me also talk about a book I co-wrote with my brother. He had the idea. I just put it into words and with his direction. This book, More Than Grasshoppers, talks about identity. Brother DJ Hill, everything in his episode that he's talking about being made in the image of God. What does that mean? How do we bear out His image? That was what we worked through in this book. And I want to encourage you, if you've never checked this out, take a look. I think that it could be a blessing to you. And so I want to share that. Now then, deep breath. Here we go. 3 more I want to talk about. Here we go. Next one. This just came out. I mean, just came out. Like I rated Pentecostal Publishing House offices to get this to show you guys. I love this book so much. Walking with Him by Dr. Jim Littles. He was one of my professors and just challenged me so deeply. A lot of what I'm now covering in this podcast is a result of his teaching. Thank you, Brother Littles, for your ministry. This is it's a collection of 52 devotions through Luke and Acts. Of course, we know Luke wrote Acts, so it makes sense that we would go from Luke to the book of Acts and just walk through all that together. And since there happen to be 52 chapters, it's perfect if you wanted to do this as your next devotional. You've got one for every week of the year, of course. And as I read this, it was just so enriching. That sounds like a formal word. I don't know the word I want here, but I just really was blessed by this. What does it have to do with holiness? Well, I said it's an ongoing journey. It's a lifestyle commitment. Well, this is a resource that will help you every week of the next year. Meditate in Scripture, meditate on the ministry of Jesus and what He was calling His followers to do. And what does that mean for me today as I then follow Him? Really want to encourage you to check out Walking with Him. Now, the last thing I'm going to do is pull back to some bigger programs that we offer, some big picture things. I mentioned stuff for children. Sometimes, honestly, I think it can be helpful for us to just go back and look at resources written for children, because those writers have the extra tough job of trying to take sometimes intangible doctrines and teachings of faith, but then put them into language accessible for children. It's a big job. And by the way, I appreciate all of you out there who may be listening who help us with that work of writing for children. If you're not aware of Elements for Children, this is the building blocks of faith put into language and a style that's very easy for children to digest. It can be used in church, can be used in home, but I'm sharing it with you as podcast listeners, viewers, because sometimes we just need to go back to the basics. And so if you want to do that in a very simplified form, here it is in Elements for Children. Now you hear about that name Elements. Let me also show you that we did a full 24 weeks, 4 modules on this idea of elements. We did this a few years ago. And this is what we would call discipleship curriculum. Now that's kind of an interesting phrase, because I've said in this first season even, we believe everything is discipleship. We never graduate from discipleship. We're all disciples, but understanding there are some starting points as new disciples. This was written for new disciples who wanted to just walk through the basics of the Bible, of the apostolic faith, the Christian faith. And so if you are in a season where you say, you know what, I just feel I'm being called to just kind of go back to square one and just walk through the basic teachings of Scripture and the basics of building a life. That's what this was geared around. And so I want to encourage you to check out Elements. You can do the whole thing. I am specifically holding up right now, not that you can probably see it, but that's okay. It just helps me stay on track. I'm holding up for you today Module 4, which is at the end of the 24 weeks. And this is called Lifestyle Elements. And what we mean by that is these 6 lessons are geared around some of these matters of holiness. And so since we've had a season on holiness, I said, I ought to make sure everybody knows out there, I love the whole program. If you're in a place in your life or in your church, you want to walk through all the basic building blocks of our faith, do it all. But if you want to just say, I just want to walk through some lessons about the basics of holiness, well, I've shared so many things. Let me also tell you, Module 4 of Elements curriculum would help you do that with a lot of reflection questions, discussion questions. So today, wanted to challenge you about thinking about, yes, this season is wrapping up, but what are you doing to look forward and keep moving in this area of ongoing lifestyle, a lifestyle of holiness, the ongoing pursuit of holiness and being like Jesus Christ? What are you doing? Well, here are some resources that can help. As is my way, I do want to end our time together with some final inventory questions. I've tried to do these on various episodes just to help us keep thinking. This topic isn't over once the podcast ends, but obviously this is something we all want to keep pursuing. So let me ask you some questions. I'm going to recycle some questions we started at the beginning of the season. In our very first episode, I asked you, are you growing? I think that's still a really good question. I hope with all of this season 1, we've helped you in that journey. You know, God makes things and He makes them to grow. We look at agriculture, we look at everything around us, and health involves growth. If you're a healthy disciple, you're a growing disciple. I hope you're growing in your knowledge of Jesus Christ and your knowledge of His Word and your personal commitments to be closer to Him. So put that question out there. If you take an inventory of your life today, are you growing? And then the next thing I want to ask is, what is your ongoing pursuit to be closer to Him? Now, that may look different person to person. I've been careful in this podcast not to try to put time limits on this is how much you need to pray, read your Bible, any of those spiritual disciplines. But what are you doing to grow closer to Him? I am believing that as we do so, as we commit to that process of growing close to Him, which I believe is discipleship, I believe holiness is the result. It's that natural fruit that comes from drawing close to Him, which is our highest goal. So I am so grateful we've had this journey together. I ask God's blessings on you. I thank you for being part of this conversation. I also want to say a special thank you to our team who's made this podcast possible. Thank you to everyone at the Pentecostal Resources Group. Thank you specifically to George, to Alina, to Braxton. Your ministry is so important. I value you and what you do for the kingdom of God. To all of you, I want to encourage you to be back with us for season 2. We're going to talk about some exciting things. We're going to have more guests on. We're going to do new conversations, but still committed to this process. As I grow close to Jesus Christ, He does great things in my life. I believe He's got good things ahead for you. I pray that you are blessed this week in all you do to grow close to Him. God bless you.